Hey, I, Zach Wolf, are doing another one of my retro computing vlogs. You know, with my IT career and my collection of vintage Apple devices, I've had a few ask me some things like, what can I do with an older Apple Macintosh computer? What's it even good for? Especially with the recent release of macOS 26 Tahoe, reported to be the last version that will support Intel-based Macs, and also actually dropping support for IEEE 1394 FireWire, as I discussed. Well, dear viewers, even if Apple and many software manufacturers drop support for the latest macOS versions, there's still plenty you could do with an old Mac. These things are built to last, which is why they're so expensive when brand new. For this video, I'm going to be showing off things I could do, and you can as well, on one of my favorite older Mac laptops. Look at this, an Apple unibody 15-inch MacBook Pro from 2012. This is the last 15-inch model to have a built-in optical disk drive, starting a trend among other computer manufacturers. No laptop on the market currently comes with an optical disk drive, be it PC or Mac, because the thinness of most modern laptops wouldn't really allow for such an optical drive to fit inside. This is also one of the first Mac notebooks to have USB 3, with its much faster data transfer rate up to 5 gigabits per second, compared to USB 2's 480 megabits per second. But still not as fast as the Thunderbolts here. The first generation Thunderbolt had 10 gigabits per second of a data transfer. And speaking of which, this was the last 15-inch Mac laptop to have a built-in IEEE 1394 FireWire port, which, like I said, was like a precursor to Thunderbolt that only transferred data, compared to Thunderbolt being able to transfer both data and video and audio images. How it could display video to a monitor. And so this allowed most Macs to ditch FireWire and mini display or DVI or whatever, combining both into an even better and faster port with adapters available. And this also has an audio line in jack, not just audio out. And you could hook up an external microphone or line in cable, like say if you want to digitize something from a record player or a tape recorder. But here's the really neat key feature attraction of this particular MacBook Pro. Look at that silver bezel. That's because this is the last Mac laptop to offer an anti-glare matte display option. Very much like the iBooks, PowerBooks, and pre-2008 MacBook Pros offered as standard. While with glossy displays, you could get some nice vibrant colors, glare could sometimes be an issue. And some professionals and power users prefer a matte display. And so back then Apple allowed such a premium option. Let me boot this baby up for you so you can see what this is good for besides showing off its features. Takes a little longer to boot this particular model because of the way the internal drive was configured. There it goes. Yeah, don't be fooled by the wallpaper there. This is actually running macOS 10.11 El Capitan. The highest officially supported on this model is macOS 10.15 Catalina. But if I run El Capitan on this, then I could run some neat older 32-bit applications. With this baby, I could surf the web using an older version of Google Chrome, as seen here. It's fun, but also not really recommended, as it's not that secure, so I almost never actually surf the internet on my older Macs. And I've got a loaded iTunes library with pretty much the same songs as on my M1 MacBook Air. Not to mention the iPhoto image organization and editing software Apple discontinued 10 years ago. I've even synced all my latest photographs into this iMac's photo library just for novelty purposes. Photos for Mac OS still has much nicer and more feature-packed image editing tools than what iPhoto used to offer. Now this is one of Apple's high-end non-Retina MacBook Pros of 2012. With a 2.6 GHz quad-core i7 processor and an NVIDIA GeForce G650M graphics card with a gigabyte of dedicated video RAM. But it only activates if you're doing any graphic-intensive tasks like gaming or video editing or heavy photo work. Otherwise, for light computing, it uses an Intel HD Graphics 400 GPU that shares system RAM. This is what Apple did with their Intel MacBook Pros throughout the 2010s, but Apple Silicon Mac GPUs work differently compared to their Intel predecessors, where the RAM shared between the system and the video card is balanced so much better, leading to very strong and fast graphic performance. Yeah, I was pretty surprised. Speaking of system RAM, on this MacBook Pro I maxed it out to 16 gigabytes, as this is the last MacBook Pro model to have user replaceable RAM, sadly. And I put a 1TB SSD in this for faster performance compared to the 5400 RPM spinning hard drive this model would have originally had. But you could configure it the order online for it to come with a 7200 RPM hard drive, or if you're willing to shell out a lot more money, an SSD, because this is back when those solid state drives were way more expensive compared to nowadays, where you can get a fairly decent 1TB SSD for just a little under $100. With all this horsepower, this 2012 MacBook Pro has to be good for something, right? Well, it is. You can still edit video on it, for one thing. Not 4K video, as that could still struggle a little, but 1080 HD video runs just smoothly on this workhorse. Heck, this vlog you're watching right now, I actually edited on this. In addition to past versions of the revamped iMovie that this supported, I've also got iMovie HD 6 on this, just for a fun throwback, if I feel like going with old school, simple timeline-based video editing, but it does take a little longer than it would on the current iMovie or Final Cut Pro. And speaking of which, I've even got Final Cut Express 4 installed on this, and have occasionally played around with it for throwback purposes. And I even have Final Cut Pro 10.1.4 installed on this from 11 years ago, which is what I'm editing this vlog on. This is pretty much how the infamously revamped Final Cut Pro used to look for the first 5 years of its existence, looking more similar to being iMovie Pro or something, or some other prosumer hobby-same video editing applications at the time, like Adobe Premiere Elements or Pinnacle Studio Ultimate. And I've talked about how this alienated so many professional video editors. But version 10.1.4 here still had some pretty nifty features compared to the initial 2011 version, like a great multicam editor, DVD chapter mark creation, XML support, and third-party plugin support. Then in 2016, Final Cut Pro got a visual overhaul that made it look more professional and slick. And I quickly adjusted to it and liked it even better, especially for my YouTube creation and other certain elaborate video projects. But 10 years ago, this is pretty much what I was using to make my YouTube poops on, and it got the job done so well. Now for a really important thing of what this 13-year-old MacBook Pro can do. For one thing, I can still burn my own DVDs on this. I mean, I don't do that very often anymore, and I could easily offer DVD discs using Roxio Toast Pro. My M1 MacBook Air hooked up to an external Blu-ray burner I also have. But iDVD, which was Apple's consumer-aimed DVD authoring software in the 2000s, it offered such elegant themes and menus to give your own movie subverted disc a really professional flair. Back in the days when DVDs were still the standard way for watching movies at home, and it'd go all out with disc menus. To today, where they're so basic and generic, as if they were actually made using today's consumer-aimed disc offering software. Ha! But yeah, even if you edit your video project on a much newer Macintosh computer, you could then copy it over to this older MacBook Pro and import it into iDVD. But if you want to make your own DVD chapter marks, then you'd have to either do it in Mac video software that supports it, like Final Cut Pro or Compressor, or the 2010 version of iMovies, as Apple will embed those chapter marks into the QuickTime MPEG-4 file it exports, and then use those chapter markers in iDVD or similar software. Then you can pick the menu template that suits your fancy, or customize it the way you want, preview the disc, and then let it burn as you continue working on your modern computer. When it's finished, you'll have a nice DVD disc, a physical one you can play back on virtually all devices capable of playing back DVD video discs, provided you authored it on a DVD-R type disc, of course. But if you want to go really further with making DVDs, if you can find it, you can run Apple's DVD Studio Pro and get some really high-class features to make it even more like the DVDs that came from Hollywood studios. Since many computer and software companies think physical media is dying, there aren't really any such professional disc offering programs available anymore, at least not easily. Besides Apple discontinuing DVD Studio Pro, there also used to be Adobe's Encore that was often bundled with Premiere Pro, and DVD Architect for the Vegas line of software from Sony and later Magix, and Roxio and Sonic's DVD and Ulead's DVD Workshop. Also, speaking of discs, I can use this old MacBook Pro here to actually rip DVDs, even copy-protected ones. You see, when working with my college's TV studio, we found that the contemporary Apple Silicon Macs can't really work with applications like DVD Fab or Macix DVD Ripper Pro, as those are still optimized for Intel Mac usage. So what they'd do is, they'd come to me, and then I'd insert the DVD into the MacBook Pro's internal super drive, open up Macix DVD Ripper Pro, and
This YouTube channel forbids the broadcast of step-by-step instructions for ripping movies from copy-protected discs. In the meantime, please enjoy this footage of the channel owner's model railroad layout.
another thing that can be done with this MacBook Pro in conjunction with the DVD drive, since it has a FireWire port and the macOS actually supports it, like I've already said, you can hook up a DV-equipped camcorder or similar video recording device to the MacBook Pro and import footage from mini DV tapes. Or, if you have a Sony Digital 8 device like I do, you can even import those along with analog video 8 and high 8 tapes. Heck, if you have access to a digital camcorder that supports analog to digital pass-through, especially with certain mid-range to higher-end Canon and Sony models like this one, or at least a FireWire-enabled analog to digital converter, you can even import footage from VHS tapes and whatnot, then do some editing and restoration on iMovie or Final Cut, or if you can even run it an older version of Premiere Pro. Heck, I've seen a few video digitizing services actually still use older Macs like mine for such purposes, taking advantage of the built-in FireWire ports and DVD drives, and the older macOS versions supporting them. Additionally, one thing I keep this older MacBook Pro handy for is if I'm editing a video project that requires royalty-free music, such as a vlog I'm going to monetize, like this one, and I want to use a certain Smart Sound music track.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, Smart Sound specializes in royalty-free stock music tracks that can be customized to the length of your choice. And different variations of different tracks, too. I used to use Smart Sound during my Windows days in the late 2000s, as certain consumer video editing applications came with an integrated version of the Smart Sound Quick Tracks music generator, including Adobe Premiere Elements or Pinnacle Studio, which was what I often used a lot at that time. But at least a couple other libraries I use have since been discontinued. You can't purchase an extended license for them anymore. If you try to load them and use them on legacy libraries on the modern versions of Sonic Fire Pro, then you get an audible watermark over the track like this.
But until Smart Sound allows some of those older discontinued libraries to be licensed again, I'm able to get around it by using an older version of Quick Tracks on an older version of Sonic Fire Pro on this MacBook Pro, before they removed the Quick Tracks functions, similar to the Smart Sound Quick Tracks and Movie Maestro features on such older programs. Then I can use these older legacy libraries. I'd still have to manually export the music file it creates, then copy it to a newer Mac using a thumb drive or even an internet file sharing thing like I do with some smaller files when I share files between my newer Macs and these older ones. Of course, in addition to Smart Sound, I also have the Apple iLife jingle library they introduced close to 20 years ago, along with some similar stock tracks they included into Final Cut Pro and Power Director, along with some Sound Ideas stock music libraries, which includes several familiar tracks used on Arthur and several 90s PC games. Or if I have the energy and inspiration, I could put some GarageBand loops together to come up with something unique, the way I have with some of my stupid statement dance mix moments in my YouTube group. So yeah, this 13-year-old MacBook Pro is still really good for something. Also, if I wanted to, I could run a Windows virtual machine on this via an older version of Parallels Desktop or VMware Fusion or VirtualBox. But I already have a somewhat newer Retina MacBook Pro for that purpose, for making Let's Play videos with. Or, if one were pretty ambitious on such an Intel Mac, you could even use Boot Camp to run an older version of Windows, at least from XP onward. It can be a really fun throwback, provided that, again, you don't really browse the internet on it, so the system stays secure. Now, as some of you may remember, for 5 years I used a Mac Mini desktop, also made in 2012, with somewhat similar specs to this MacBook Pro, only the Mini just had integrated graphics, and it didn't have a built-in optical drive. But with a 2.3 GHz quad-core i7 processor and 60 GB of RAM, that Mac Mini did everything I needed it to do, including frequent digital media work. I bought that Mac Mini used from a now-defunct electronics shop in downtown Boston in early 2016. And I kept using it as my main computer until I bought my M1 MacBook Air in the spring of 2021, since I needed a Mac that could run the newest Mac OS version. So I figured I'd take the plunge and make the transition to Apple Silicon right away, and I couldn't be happier. But I do eventually want to get another Apple Silicon Mac Mini, preferably one with a Pro chip and 48 GB of RAM or greater. It'll probably be waiting until later in the winter or early spring, especially if there's no signs of the Mac Mini getting revised with the M5 or even an M6 chip anytime soon. Then my Mac usage would take an even bigger boost, but I'd still use my M1 Air for when I'm on the go or something, until Apple eventually drops support for the newer macOS versions from that MacBook Air. They may not be user serviceable anymore, but they're really fast and energy efficient. And it helps like backup means of computing as well. But I guess that's enough for now. Just keep watching this YouTube channel to see whatever I show off here next.